way I understand popular culture it's important to remember that practitioners of popular culture, people who live popular culture, don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to do some popular culture. This is already a position coming from outside that decides that this realm is popular and then this is official and so on. So I think it's important for those who practice from the other position, from academia or from as critics or so on, to constantly be aware of this. Because oftentimes we see a lot of literature coming out that talks about things like mulids or certain practices. Graffiti, of course, after 2011 got a good amount of attention, but I felt a lot of the authors are unaware of their positions. Either they sort of dive in and pretend that they've been there all along, even though they've probably parachuted from out of sight for a short period of time, wrote a nice book or an essay and left. Or it's totally accepting of sort of the outside position as if it doesn't exist. And I think positionality and sort of labels and categories are quite important in this. So this is one thing. The other thing is the production of different discourses that are different registers. When I first came in 2010 as an RC fellow, actually, this is why I ended up coming here to do my PhD research. My immediate observation was there's a lot to talk about in the city, but there's no natural platform to do this. And I'm not a person that was very confident in sort of putting out there rants and opinion pieces or whatever you want to call it, because sometimes my Facebook posts just end up being ranty and I delete half of them, and that actually reminds me of another problem, which is the archive of the discourse is so ephemeral. But I ended up starting a blog, and like Nadir said, the blog gained some traction, and I think because there was so much happening in the platform, in the city that people needed to discuss. What was interesting for me is that people started to send voluntarily their content to be posted on the platform instead of starting their own, which meant that for a moment they thought, okay, I have something to say, but I'm not going to commit to starting something new altogether. So it became sort of a net that catches things that are floating down the stream. Sometimes they're by people who've never written anything, sometimes it's by people who come from very different registers, academic or not. Sometimes it was in Arabic, in English, and Armenian, it depends. And then also content from other cities that oddly enough wanted to be posted publicly on something called Cairobserver, which is interesting because I think when you read the New Yorkers, you're not only reading about New York or something like this, so it's not an odd concept. But I think what was interesting for me to realize afterwards what Cairobserver was is that it's a multi-voice platform. I sort of try to constantly be to navigate the space of the city by having something to say about different aspects of it, but the fact that it wasn't just one person speaking with their voice, and as much as possible to be aware of not claiming any authority also, I think is really important, because a lot of this kind of discourse gets overwhelmed by pretension of authority that doesn't necessarily feel valid at all times. Not that it has to, but I mean it's something to discuss and to negotiate. But anyway, so after that, also my practice, or defining who I am as, am I an academic or what am I doing, frustration kicked in, and finding that, realizing that there's also kind of a parasitical relationship with Egypt. A lot of academics, for example, would come here for a fellowship, or and again, this is not a criticism directed to individual people, but it's a condition that we should acknowledge, that a lot of knowledge is produced about Egypt that's never available in Egypt. It's never translated in Egypt, it's never read in Egypt, but it gets people tenure jobs somewhere else, it gets them fellowships somewhere else. So it's a kind of a parasitical relationship with a place where, especially if we're talking about, let's say, someone who can afford the time and space and resources to observe and to write about these things, I feel there is a bit of responsibility, given the condition, the lack of institutions that do things like archiving the popular, publishing them, to actually give back in some way by producing content that's locally relevant, creating spaces, even if they're momentary, a small exhibition, open your collection of whatever you collect and make it visitable, open for discussion as opposed to being constantly invisible. And hence I ended up doing things like curating exhibitions, if I can, to do it here. We can talk later on, probably in the museum segment, about limitations in doing more activity like this year. I think I've passed my 5 minutes. It's fun.